Hey guys, we're going to go live in 1 minute, and we are live. Good morning and welcome to the latest edition of the online multi-party panel by Youth Capital. Yes or no? Is youth unemployment a priority this election as parties battle for your vote on May the 29th when South Africans head to the polls? Today we're talking about the record in government. Political parties have a lot to say around election time, but what have they actually done when they've been given the chance to govern? The ANC has a long and illustrious record of governance. Some might say that's a blessing. Others might say it's a curse. Alongside the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance, and of course the Inkatha Freedom Party, who have also governed at a provincial level in the democratic era. But what is the role of smaller parties in coalitions and in kingmaker politics? Well, we'll be discussing just that in the next hour. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Nicolaas Bauer. And of course, remember, these vodcasts, this series, is Youth Capital's attempt to continue canvassing for the continuation of the Presidential Employment Stimulus, a first-time job opportunity program that is provided to young people in South Africa. On the panel, we have the ANC Youth League's Fasir Hassan, the Democratic Alliance's Nicholas Inyati, the IFP Youth Brigade's Sanele Zondo, the ACDP's Raymond Tlaele, as well as the Patriotic Alliance's Chad Lowe. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll hear from you in a moment or so, but to set the scene, we're joined by two individuals. First and foremost, we've got socio-political economist Lukhona Mnguni. He's going to be giving us a lay of the land politically. And of course, the youth organizer, T. Malatsi. They've, of course, got some experience in governance at a local level and, of course, takes a keen interest in where South Africa's youth politics are going, especially when it comes to the youth vote this election in 2024. Remember, we are looking forward to your questions on the chat line and, of course, also on social media. You can hit me up on Twitter at Nicolaas Bauer. Otherwise, you can also follow Youth Capital there on Twitter, formerly Twitter, now of X. And we look forward to engaging with you throughout this vodcast. But let's set the scene for you, shall we? Lukhona Mnguni, thank you very much for your time. It seems pretty pertinent that we're talking about youth unemployment so close to an election. News coming out of Stats SA yesterday, first quarter of 2024, 32.1% unemployment. South Africa with the highest rate of sustained unemployment in the world. And if you think that's bad, well, look at the over 50% youth unemployment that South Africa perpetually suffers. Kunzima, Lukhona.
A very good morning, Nicholas, and good morning to the colleagues on the panel. And thank you, Youth Capital, for always bringing us together on these thought-provoking conversations regarding the lay of the land politically, but the state of youth in our country. Indeed, Nicholas, I mean, the truth is that we're speaking a day after this, jump in unemployment of 0.8%. as issued by Stats SA yesterday in terms of the statistics for quarter one. But I mean, I think 0.1% increase, decrease means nothing fundamentally for young people. There is a seismic shift that has to happen in how we think about, young people, and whether political parties have that top of their mind is something that I suppose we will hear much more as this conversation goes along. But what is quite clear is, one, young people are not only deprived of opportunities to develop themselves and advance themselves, but they are also underrepresented in institutions that take decisions on their behalf and for their own future. And I mean, I know that in the South African context, there's only one political party that has consistently touted the idea even of a youth ministry, which is the IFP, for a very long time, calling for a youth ministry. And we know in countries like Ghana that over time did eventually end up implementing a youth ministry, that the fortunes of young people, because there was institutionalized, dedicated focus, the fortunes of young people started to improve. In the context of South Africa, of course, we've got the National Youth Development Agency, which is meant to hand over to the president, I think every 3 years or so, the state of youth report in the country. And hopefully then the president can do something about that by giving a government-wide mandate. But that has not been happening, to be quite honest. Young people, Nicholas, are confronted with a multiplicity of issues. In the first instance, when we talk about this unemployment and what it represents, what that unemployment represents in its vastness is a reality that young people are not finishing school. And those who finish school do not have post-school opportunities for training, for skills development, and for knowledge acquisition. And therefore, that's why you continuously see this ballooning of the bracket of what we call not in employment, education, or training, the NEET category. And that is what, Julius Nyerere in Tanzania would have called in the 60s loitering youth. So we've got a bulge of a loitering youth in South Africa. And the question is whether or not the current policy instruments that are available to us are adequate enough to convert this loitering youth into an economic productive youth. And if it is not possible to convert
Lekona, I'm not too sure whether or not
economic productive youth, and one may want what do first instances to take. I can hear you.
Okay, Lekona, beg your pardon. You are breaking up a little bit there. In the interest of time, I'm going to try and move the conversation forward a little bit. You've given us an adequate representation of where South Africa is from a youth employment perspective. But let's talk about what the parties are doing now to try and convince young people to vote for them this election. There's a big difference between campaigning and governing. And like I said, there's only a handful of parties that can say that they actually have governance experience. But for the layman, perhaps, not to cast aspersions on anybody watching this today, but give us a very simple definition. What's the difference between campaigning and actually governing? Because on the campaign trail, you can say what you like, but it's a different kettle of fish when you actually have to deliver. Lukona, are you still there? All right, if you've just joined us, we're on the Yes or No Youth Unemployment Vodcast, brought to you by Youth Capital. I'm Nicholas Bauer. We are in discussion with the ANC Youth League, the DA, the IFP Youth Brigade, ACDP, and Patriotic Alliance, having a look at their plans to combat youth unemployment in South Africa, and of course, trying to see where the solutions lie for a very precarious situation. Let's try and speak to socio-political economist Lukona Mguni. Lukona, are you there? Okay, it seems as though we've lost Lukona. As I said, we would be keen to hear from you, find out what you have to say in terms of your own lived experience as a young person. You can reach out to us on social media at Nicholas Bauer on x.com. That's my Twitter feed. And of course, also you'll find Youth Capital as well. And our chat function is also open. You'll be able to chat us live on Zoom. I'm going to try get Lukona on one more time. Lukona, are you with us? Lukona, are you there? All right. We'll have to come back to
you. Can hear me?
There we go. Yes, yeah. Lukona, please, in the interest of time, maybe switch off your video so that your connection might be a little bit more free-flowing. But very briefly, maybe explain to us, what's the difference between campaigning and actually governing? Because in an election cycle, political parties can say what they like to try and convince people to get to the polls and vote for them. But it doesn't necessarily bear out to reality what happens when they're in power. Okay, the technical demons are wreaking havoc with us today. It looks as though the connectivity issues that Lukona Mguni is experiencing.
If you can hear me.
Lukona, are you there? Yes, please go right ahead.
And I've had your question. I mean, in the sense that campaigning
Okay, that simply is just
Where's
not going to.
governing? Where's
Lukona,
governing?
if you can hear me, you're just too disconnected, as it were. I do apologize, but we'll have to move on with the conversation here. Someone else that's experiencing some connectivity issues is Fasia Hassan. We normally go in order of representation in the National Assembly, but we'll start with Nicholas Nyati in a moment or so. And essentially, the point that we're trying to get to today, ladies and gentlemen, is that youth unemployment in South Africa is a persistent problem. Is it going to be fixed by merely policy wishes or actually governing progressively for the next 5 years? The point that we were trying to make with Lukona Mguni is that campaigning is vastly different from governing. Many promises can be made on the campaign trail, but governing is messy, governing is complicated, and very often political parties promise the earth and maybe just deliver a small granular of sand. Nicholas Nyati, representing the Democratic Alliance, official opposition. Can you hear me, or have the technical demons also attacked you?
I can hear you loud and clear, Nicholas. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, fantastic. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it with you. Why do you think young people, and of course South Africans at large, should vote for the Democratic Alliance on May the 29th based on your youth employment policies? We're standing at over 50% youth unemployment, the chief ticking time bomb in a myriad of time bombs South Africa is facing. So why should the people of South Africa vote for you?
No, thank you very much. I think perhaps let me start by thanking young people who went out to register to vote. If you look at the stats, we have a large number of young people who are actually registered to vote. Now they need to go and take step 2, which is actually voting. Young people should vote for the DA because we prioritize the things that matter. And in terms of your question, the difference between campaigning and actually governing. Campaigning is where you make your promises, and governing is where you deliver on those promises. The DA is the only party in South Africa currently that actually does that. If you look at our budget spend, if you look at the best run municipalities in this country, it's DA-led. If you look at the best run province in this country, it's a DA-led province. Even if you look at the recent stats that came out, the lowest unemployment rate is found in the Western Cape. But if you look at immigration numbers, they're actually quite high because people are going to the Western Cape to seek jobs, and the DA governance there is doing its best to create an environment where people can come and invest in order to create jobs. The mistake that most governments do is that they think it is the duty of government itself to create a job. The duty of government is to create an environment where business can come, invest, and be able to create jobs. You will see in other provinces, people are speaking about EPWP or CWP. Those are not permanent jobs, it's 6-month jobs. But if you go to the Western Cape, we speak about attracting Amazon, we speak about building infrastructure, investing heavily in infrastructure because we understand the impact that it's going to have. The second most painful thing is that in South Africa, we have a job killer, and that job killer is load shedding. Load shedding is currently caused by the government. Load shedding is killing a lot of jobs. The DA, when you come into government, we are going to end load shedding. We've already started in the Western Cape with introducing independent power producers and wanting to bring them into the system where we can have a load shedding free province and a load shedding free country that is going to come and attract business to come and invest. We speak about crime. Crime is killing us. Crime is chasing away business people. Crime is chasing away investors. If you tackle crime, automatically you bring a safer environment. We also speak about a controversial one, Nicholas, which is your minimum wage. We say a young person who's just completed tertiary education, has a qualification, but now has no job, or a young person with no skill who wants to enter the workplace cannot, because there are these rigid policies. These rigid policies do not just kill big business, but they actually kill small business. Imagine an SMME that is forced to pay minimum wage. We are saying we are going to introduce something called a youth employment certificate that is going to be valid for 24 months. That says, me as Nicholas, I'm willing to trade 3,500 or whatever. We agree with the person who's going to be hiring me. For me, number one, to get into a job. Number two, to have the work experience. After 24 months, I can then enter and get paid minimum wage. What this will do is it will give young people the necessary work experience that they need to enter the workplace. And secondly, it is going to at least give them something that they can take home. 350 is not enough for young people. At least
Mr. Nyati, Mr. Nyati, make your final point, and then I have one question for you, please. Your final point, please.
Okay. So we also speak about eradicating the race-based policies and red tape, because if you look at the employment equity, it's not creating jobs, it's actually killing them. If you look at BEE, it's not creating jobs, it's actually killing them. So these are the policy perspectives that we look at, and you can trust that the DA, when we come into government, will be able to implement them.
A quick follow-on question, Mr. Nyati. What does the DA plan to do to ensure that workers, young workers, are not taken advantage of and exploited if they enter into short-term contracts when you can earn as little as a paltry 2,500 Rand a month? Surely it is much more than the 350 Rand stipend that government is offering young and, of course, older unemployed people. But what assurances does the DA have that these young workers won't be exploited?
Look, the policy itself is looking at empowering actually SMMEs that are owned by the same very young people. I'll make an example. I have a personal friend who got a contract for security in the rural Mthatha. The lady is expected to pay people minimum wage. She cannot afford it. She's actually running at a loss because of that. And the people that work for her are willing to take 3.5, but it is against our policies. I have a friend, Sihle Maseko, in place who has a farm. He cannot pay his workers. His production is going low. This is a black young man, a 27-year-old with a farm. If we introduce this, Sihle will never exploit people from his own community that also benefit from that farm. And we are saying it's not a must. A youth employment certificate must be an agreement between the employer and the employee for them to reach an agreement. We support minimum wage as the TA, and it is not going to affect the people already in the system. But we are saying at entry level, let people enter with at least whatever they're willing to take so that they can get the necessary experience. And also, number two, be able to sustain themselves. We just want to introduce a foot in the door for young people. And I think that's a fair request than having young people sitting at home with no form of income.
Thank you very much, Nicholas Nyati from the Democratic Alliance. We'll hear from the ANC Youth League's Fasir Hassan. She's going to be joining us. I see that she's back on now, also battling some connectivity issues. We normally come to the majority party first, but in light of those connectivity issues, you now have the second bite of the cherry, Fasir. The ANC has been in power for 30 years. You are spokesperson for the youth body of the ANC Youth League. What is the ANC's policies when it comes to youth unemployment to address this dire situation?
Thanks very much, Niklaus, and all those who are tuned in. As you can hear, I'm also battling the flu, so I'm very nasally. I'll have a few coughs here and there, but I know that those who are online will be very understanding. I'm going to start by answering you with two points, right? The first is that as the ANC Youth League in particular, we've called for youth unemployment to be declared a national crisis. And the reasoning behind this is because of how systemic and how widespread it is, but also because of the fact that when one declares something a national crisis, it means the very best of all the different elements, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector, are really utilized in terms of resources to solving the problem. But you're quite right, the ANC has been in governance for some time now, and let me speak to some of the interventions that have already taken place, and then I'll speak to some of the solutions going forward. The first thing, and this is very important, under President Ramaphosa in this particular administration, there's been what we call the presidential employment stimulus, and you spoke to it in your opening remarks, where government invested over 32 billion rand, and that started in 2020 as a mass employment program to create jobs, to create work experience and support livelihoods. And in terms of real numbers, over 1.2 million young people, especially women, youth yes, but especially women, have benefited from this program. In the creative sector alone, we've had over 32,000 people who've been supported to produce movies, animations, books in indigenous languages. And I'm trying to show some of the diversity or the versatility of this program, because we always think in very industrial ideas, which I'll speak to in a moment, but just to show you it's a lot more widespread than that. What's also important is we've raised over 1.5 trillion rand in foreign direct investment pledges, of which over 500 billion is already flowing in the economy. And that's being used in terms of economic growth to intervene with young people, but also to intervene generally. I want to talk to Black industrialists, and I think it's quite an important one because there's been lots of attacks on BEE, and there's this untrue notion that it hasn't actually helped the masses of our country. We've invested over 15 billion. In 2004, Niklaus, we only had 2% of Black ownership in the economy and in business. Right now, we've moved that number up to 39%. Now, that's an exponential growth over the last few years. And that's been very, very targeted. But I want to speak to 3 important points. Governments committed, and the ANC committed through the government, of course, to first-time opportunities. Now, that doesn't relinquish the fact that there's a much greater systemic issue. When you talk about youth unemployment, we say it as one whole cohort. That's also not true. We need to have different segmented approaches. Somebody who has a grade 9 vis-a-vis a matric, vis-a-vis a university education, vis-a-vis a master's, everybody needs a different intervention. And in our manifesto, we deal very particularly on each of those groupings. But effectively, we've committed to a first-time opportunity to get your foot through the door. The SA Youth Mobi site is also very important for 2 reasons. Apart from it being accessible and data-free, it's also created a vast database where both the public and the private sector are able to more carefully and considered match skills to opportunities. And look, there's still a whole lot more to do, but I think there's a real, value in it. And also I'll end on this. Government, of course, must create an enabling environment for economic growth, but it is fundamentally true that the majority of the economy sits in the private sector, over 2/3 of it. And so there must be more job creation that's happened in the private sector. As the ANC-led government, we've removed experience for entry-level jobs in the public sector, and we're pushing very hard for the same at the private sector level. But that's why I started by saying national crisis, because we need the private sector to come to the table. And in my interactions, I've met a number of different young people. We're in different communities every day, and there's so many interventions and beneficiaries of different interventions along that point. But I'll conclude by saying a lot is happening, but a lot more needs to be done. Thank you.
San, a quick follow-on question for you there then. The ANC has had 30 years in power, and you've listed a long list of achievements there, but unfortunately that main number when it comes to youth unemployment remains eye-wateringly high. I want to know, how is declaring youth unemployment a crisis going to help the situation at all? What is the practical outcome of that the ANC Youth League would hope for?
The thinking around it is looking towards what happened during COVID. And I didn't want to use disaster because, of course, there's a different set of legislation that governs it. But the idea really is to remove all of the red tape that's currently in place, especially when it comes to SMMEs and how we support them. In Gauteng, in fact, where I was chairing the Economic Development Portfolio Committee, we actually passed the Township Economic Development Act. And that seeks to undo spatial apartheid in terms of economic opportunity. And that's a really important tangible example of some of those interventions. But the idea is we want the best of the private sector. We want the best of the public sector. We want that social compact, that agreement we have in society to all be focused on solving the problem. And that means in other practical circumstances, looking at the high growth factors of the economy. If you look at agro-processing, if you look at the automotive industry, and if you look even at the textile industry, which we're now trying to rebirth and I think re-support, because they've of course been through dumping laws and all of those other things really decimated. And I use these 3 examples because these are industries in which we can show the very best of that social compact coming together. So it is about skills, but it's also about opening up those economic driving sectors and industries so that there's space for us to go into. But of course, Niklaus, if we're being honest, it's systemic and it's cyclical. We're not going to solve it overnight. And I think that's where you need very practical and very well thought out policies. And also, I think a removal of this attempt to be very populist in how we solve it. I think if it was that easy, we would have just solved unemployment with the snap of our fingers. It's far more complex, requires a lot of thinking, but I can guarantee you that the best minds in the country are working on it even now.
This is Hassan of the ANC Youth League. You're on the multi-party panel hosted by Youth Capital. We're talking about youth unemployment. Unfortunately, the gremlins, technical gremlins, really wreaking havoc with us today. The IFP Youth Brigade has fallen off now. We're trying to get a hold of Mr. Zondo to get him back on the line. But let's hurry things along and speak to the ACDP Secretary General Raymond Tlale. Thank you very much for your attention this morning. What is the ACDP, a long-standing opposition party? What's your policy when it comes to youth unemployment?
Thank you very much, Nicholas, and good morning to the rest of the colleagues and participants, and also to the youth capital. Nicholas, before I answer your question, let me go straight to the comments that were made by Lucona. Very important comments there. Mention the fact that there's a lot of dropouts of the youth, and there is also the youth are underrepresented, the youth are loitering, and of course, how do we convert our youth into productive youth segment? Very important comments indeed. That is where the ACDP is going to begin. Nicholas and the participants, we need to recognize first as ACDP that we had to recognize that we've got a very vibrant youth in the South Africa. And the people are approaching the youth as if they are waiting there to be given, to be handed over solutions to their problems. We're starting by saying that we have recognized that we've got a very vibrant youth that's already started on their own, lots of them, to create jobs, lots of them to enter the labor market, the space, and also be participants in the improvement and growth of the economy of the country. And we can't not recognize that, because if you approach them in a way of us giving them solutions to their problems, it's like we undermine their capacity to be able to do so themselves. As ACDP, we are saying it's very important for us to help and assist the youth where it is necessary. Number one, we recognize the fact that there is lack of integrated policy design as well as implementation. If you look at the departments, various departments that are tasked to assist the youth in terms of unemployment, as well as skills development, you'll notice that they are not well coordinated. And there are too fragmented, and there is that inefficient, I'll say, cross-sectional implementation. And that is one of the things that our policy is going to address. Our policy is going to address also, you look at the poor education outcomes. Central, Nicholas and members, to the youth unemployment in South Africa, central, it's the education system. Because you see that the poor outcomes in our basic education, numeracy and literacy, causes the very same issue Lucona is addressing, and that is the high school dropout rate. And what happens when they drop out? Nothing happens in between. So again, you find those youths doing what? Now they're loitering, they get engaged into drug abuse and other things. So we are saying that must also be dealt with. We have a policy to can deal with that. But remember, I said together with them, okay, in terms of their own initiatives, we'll be able to do that. There is also, this causes lack of provision, if you look at it, Nicholas, for also technical and work-related soft skills. That's a general problem. The inability finally to compete in a competitive labor market is caused by the very same lack of basic numeracy and literacy from our youth. There are a number of factors we have identified, but finally, the last one I would like to mention is we have, unfortunately, the employers, which are very much opposed or they are risk averse when it comes to the youth employment, okay? And we can't blame them because this happens due to the quality of education that our system is providing to our youth. And therefore, the employers become very hesitant to can employ the young South Africans because of the type of education they receive, which is not necessarily linked to the market requirements or labor expectations from our youth. And so we're going to address that as well. Now, finally, if you look at the individual and the
final point, please, Mr. Tlale, we need to move on.
Okay, sir, thank you very much. If you look at the individual households level, that is the background, the barriers, we need to agree that this geographical isolation of the most of the youth that are coming from poor backgrounds in the rural areas, they become isolated because of that geographic situation. Some of them are not even getting support when it comes to as job seekers, when it comes to the government as well as the private sector. And therefore, we are saying these levels of the background of individual household barriers should also be addressed. And our policy is intending to do exactly that. Thank you.
Raymond Lally from the ACDP. We've got Sanele Zondo back on the line. Mr. Zondo, I see that you're connected. Your camera is off. We're coming to you next as the leader of the IFP Youth Brigade. Mr. Zondo, are you there? You're still on mute, Mr. Zondo. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Thank you for hosting us.
Mr. Zondo, your connection seems very ropey as well. Let's try and see whether or not we can get something out of you, though. What is the IFP's policies when it comes to youth unemployment? What have you done as a party that governs to attack youth unemployment?
Firstly, thanks for sharing. As the IFP, we have policies that put South Africa first, especially the youth of this country. The policy that we have proposed in Parliament.
Well, that's very unfortunate. Let's go without any delay to the Patriotic Alliance's Chad Lowe. Patriotic Alliance has been kingmaker in many local governments around the country. And Chad Lowe, I want to find out your party, what's your policies when it comes to attacking youth unemployment?
Thank you, Nicholas. I hope you can hear me clearly. Good morning to the other panelists and also the attendees. Nicholas, let me start by saying for every 100 South African that's applying for a job, 100 people applies for a job today, only 6 of them are successful in getting a job. And looking at from 2014 up to 2023, the unemployment rate rose from 25% actually to 32.4%. And now we're looking at the first quarter of 2024, where the unemployment rate is now 32.9%. It's at a staggering 32.9%. It means it actually, the situation worsened. It's from bad to worse. As the Patriotic Alliance, we are putting mechanisms in place to address these kind of challenges that we are facing, especially when it comes to unemployment, but also having a look at what are the factors actually for unemployment. And we must be honest about it. Some of these things are ANC policies, it is corruption, it is the unended load shedding that we are currently facing, and there are no mechanisms in place to address these things. If you have a look at it and you go on to Google and you do research on these things, you could actually see that no one are actually being held accountable for the unemployment in South Africa. One of 2 things that I'm going to mention that the Patriotic Alliance really wants to do, and it's part of our manifesto, is to say that we should address the illegal foreigners coming to our country, taking the jobs of South Africans. That's one. Number 2 is also to make military services compulsory for these ones over the age of 18. And I think that those 2 things can really address unemployment in our country. Let's also talk about rate type reduction in SMMEs, and also to have a more of a much more, not say really complex, but much more simplified kind of approach when it comes to SMME development and also the access to funding and so on. So the ANC government has a 350 grant that they are currently giving to unemployed youth. And these 350 grant doesn't actually benefit these youth or unemployed people at the moment because they're not even putting it to good use. I don't think the presidential stimulus program of the ANC is actually beneficial because it's still actually as a more of a contract situation where people are just working for 6 months, so it's not sustainable, saying that this actually gives people an opportunity for a job that gives him an opportunity of a lifetime. What we are putting in place is also to say that if you have a look at...
Your final point, Mr. Lowe.
Thanks. My final point, Nicholas, would be to say that we should also put mechanisms in place when it comes to the integration of Home Affairs and Department of Labor, especially on illegal foreigners, because we are not actually enforcing the law properly. And also to say that these companies that are employing illegal foreigners are not even registered on the labor database to receive UIFs, and also to say that they are illegally employed in the companies in South Africa. That's my last point, Nicholas.
Very, very briefly, Mr. Lowe, before we hand on over to our youth activist C. Malachi and give them a chance to engage with our panelists today. How on earth is military service that the PA is asking for, Mr. Lowe? How is that going to tackle youth unemployment?
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas, if you actually look at the numbers, and I think it's between 24 to 25, these are actually the majority of people that are unemployed. And that's in the early years of your youth. So getting an opportunity, if you didn't get an opportunity to go for tertiary education, you're finding yourself at home with no other mechanism in place to afford yourself an opportunity to work, to gain the necessary income, the military services will afford you that. Definitely you will get a huge number and influx of youth if we take over government that will get employment by going into the military services if they apply for military services after the age of 18.
All right, Mr. Lowe, thank you very much for that. All right, let's hear from our youth activist, C. Malachi. If you've just joined us, Nicholas Bauer is the name. I'm hosting you on the multi-party online panel brought to you by Youth Capital. Yes or no? Is youth unemployment a priority this election season? We're joined by the ANC Youth, the Democratic Alliance, ACDP, and the Patriotic Alliance. We were supposed to be joined by the IFP Youth Brigade, but a host of technical issues that we are rolling with today. I'm hoping that you're able to hear me loud and clear.
Good day, Niklaus. Do you hear me?
Yes, please. Go ahead and maybe engage straight away with, in terms of representation of Parliament, we'll go in the order of the ANC Youth League first. She, being the youth activist, bringing to life what life is like on the ground for young people. Chi, what is your question for Fasir Hassan?
Thank you for this opportunity and good morning to everyone. I suppose to the ANC representative, and I was listening to the way you were speaking about public jobs program and the answer that you gave earlier. Something we've observed working in youth communities is that this public employment does indeed work. The Presidential Employment Stimulus Program, Public Works, National Youth Service, these are all programs that have been helping young people access work. So why is there a sense from the ANC, a nervousness about significantly funding and scaling up these programs? We've already heard some cuts to the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program. You found a formula that works, but you're cutting back on funding. So I want to know, why is that?
May I go ahead, Niklaus? Or?
Yes, please, go right ahead.
Okay, no, thanks very much, Chi. I really appreciate that. You're quite right. Actually, these programs are starting to provide, I think, fruits of many different labors. One of the challenges has been, unfortunately, we are in an austerity budget kind of context, right? And you're seeing that, unfortunately, and I have very strong views about this, even as an activist, about putting up two different programs against each other. And one of the things that President Ramaphosa and the ANC were fighting for, even as the Youth League, is fundamentally about scaling up these programs. And as I mentioned earlier, right, that there needs to be different multi-segmented approaches. But what we are seeing is, for example, Yes for Youth, they're doing very well as well, and they've been able to leverage a number of private sector job opportunities for people. And by the way, those are not short-term contracts. We are trying to transfer from short-term, I would say, lack of sustainability into a more sustainable job opportunity space. But there's two other points I also want to talk to, right? And that is the 350 grant. Many people are very critical of this 350 grant, but we also need to look at the context in which it was provided. This was during COVID-19, where people didn't have access to opportunities at all. And very importantly, this 350 grant, we would like it to pave the way for what is called a universal basic income. Now, that doesn't mean that we want people to be wholly dependent on the state. What we want is when young people or people in general are really struggling, they have a safety net to go to. And of course, 350 is not enough. I'm not going to go on any public platform and say that 350 is sufficient. But it is a very good basis for us trying to stimulate the economy in a number of shapes and forms. And also maybe important for me to say, Chi, is that the reality here, even on this panel, And I think Lukhona said this, there is a lack of representation of young people in every industry. Even here, right, I'm the only woman on the panel. The ACDP sent an older gentleman. And there's a reality here that we need to openly face, that until young people actively take up the reins of decision making, we will unfortunately always relegate our power, I think, to people who don't understand our lived experiences. And I'll close with this, Niklaus. The ANC list across the country includes 153 young people. Of that total list, 53% of them are women. And we are trying to actively change and transform the state. It is a slow process, unfortunately, but we are pushing as the Youth League to fast track it. But thank you for that important question.
See, please go right ahead and ask your next question. Nicholas Nyati from the DA, please stand by.
So again, I was listening to the contributions from the representative from the Democratic Alliance, and something that really stood out was when they said that government job programs are temporary, are not permanent jobs. It has been this general language from the Democratic Alliance that the government isn't directly responsible for making jobs, but just for making an environment. So for many young people with this sort of language, it makes us worried that there'll be much less public spending under the Democratic Alliance. Will there be enough spending on programs, especially for young people? What I see working with young people is that we need more social programs, more skills development, more jobs initiatives, but there's a worry that we might see less of this. So what do you say to that?
Thank you very much. I think perhaps for us, it makes it easier for myself to answer this question because we are not like the ACDP or PA who've never governed. We have a track record. You can go to the Western Cape. We currently control the state and the province in the Western Cape. And science tells us that it is the Western Cape that has the lowest unemployment rate. So it actually disproves your point. When the DA says that the duty of government is to create a conducive environment for job creation, that is actually true. I'll make an example. In the Western Cape, one of the best performing farms in this country are from the Western Cape. This is happening because we are able to remove red tape when a person wants to start a farm. Secondly, there's water supply. Thirdly, the roads are working. And that is what affects productivity of a farm. You want to farm your apples, you want your apples to be able to reach the ports. We've called out to say, can we even be given power to control our ports? Because we understand the importance of that chain of thought. If you look at programs that you speak about government investing, when load shedding hit, there was a gentleman, a 22-year-old, who has started a chocolate factory in Stellenbosch. He has started it's a colored young male. With his friend, they started a chocolate factory. When load shedding came, his chocolate was melting and his business was dying. The government intervened to say, we are not going to give you a handout, but we'll rather support you to ensure that your business rolls. We gave him generators and we're able to at least give him a facility he was going to rent at minimum because he was creating employment for other young people in the community. And that's what we mean, that the duty of government is to create an environment. Because this theory that government must employ people has been proven that it fails. You come to OR Tambo municipality in the Eastern Cape. OR Tambo municipality was all over the media because their salaries were more than 60% of their total budget. That municipality went bankrupt because the people didn't understand. They thought that the duty of government is to just create jobs and give jobs for pounds. And that municipality was run to the ground. So government creates an environment that is going to enable business to thrive and enable people to get access to opportunities. We do support skills, support programs. We do offer skills. We do employ people when opportunities come, but it is not our primary duty to go and employ everyone. If any political party comes to you and says that as a government, they will employ people as a government alone, then those people are misleading you. And perhaps it takes us to the first question.
Final point there, Mr. Nyati, please.
I'm done, Nicholas.
Klaus, can I just come in on something there, if you'll allow me?
Yes, I want to give a chance to Raymond Lally and Chad Lowe. So please, by all means, come in. But Try and keep it
I'll be
brief.
very quick. I'll be very quick. I just want to dispel this notion that the Western Cape is better run. There's two important points here. The first is better run for who? There's a tale of two cities here. If you move beyond the Cape Metro and you look at who the true beneficiaries are of the policies, unfortunately, it is a white minority. But beyond that, it actually is not true, and this has been fact-checked, that the Western Cape is creating the most amount of jobs in the country. Gauteng, as an ANC-led government, is actually creating more net jobs in the country than the Western Cape. So this idea that the Western Cape is better run and it's this utopia, it is one of, unfortunately, the most racist provinces in the country. And more needs to be done in transformation, and more needs to be done in townships and in colored communities, because those communities have been left behind. Thank you.
Nicholas, I'm also going to have to come in because I cannot let Fasia come here and lie.
Okay,
And
well, Mr. Please, if you can just respond to the points there, and then we're going to move on to Raymond and Chad. We don't want this to end up being crossfire, but please go right ahead, Nicholas.
We've always debated. I thought that she was going to change from her style of lying in debates. If you look at Stats SA, is Fasiha coming today and saying that Stats SA is lying? Is Fasiha coming here today and saying the National Treasury is lying? Is Fasiha coming here and telling us that all independent auditors are lying when they say that the Western Cape is best run? You look at our budget spend. When we spend the budget, 70% of our budget in the city of Cape Town goes to previously disadvantaged areas. We inherited Cape Town and the Western Cape from their failed government. We're doing everything in our power to address a backlog which they left. The people of Western Cape are not dumb. And that's why they continue to vote for the TA, because they can see the change that we are impacting. Now, I want to dispel this notion. If you go to the infrastructure development that we have in Kuala, if you go to the libraries that were built in Mitchell's Plain, people must not come here and want to divide us on race. And perhaps this is where we fail as a country. We have politicians like Julius Malema, politicians like Fasiha and Gayton, who divide us along racial lines. And I want to say to anyone watching from home, we must never allow these people to divide us. We must rather unite and work towards building a South Africa that is for all. And it's quite disappointing for someone from a non-racial, non-sexist organization to come here and divide us around sex and race.
All right, there we go. A response. I would like to see the debate be carried forward. However, we need to move on. Raymond Tlale from the ACDP. You are now going to be asked your question by T. Malati. T, go right ahead, please.
Thank you so much. So to the representative from the ACDP, I did manage to read your manifesto, and some of the comments that you made on this call were somewhat different from what is written down on paper in your manifesto. It almost seems as if the main goal of the ACDP to increase youth employment is focused around expanding something called the Employment Tax Incentive, or ETI. Why do you think expanding the ETI would increase youth employment? Do you think this is enough of a measure? Has the ETI worked so far so that if we were to increase it, it would increase youth employment? Because where I'm coming from in my community, I cannot find companies that have said the ETI has worked for us. It has been easy to access. We've employed young people because of the ETI. I don't know any young people in my immediate community who can report that because there's an ETI, they have been employed. So my broad question is, what exactly is the ACDP's plans with regard to increasing youth employment? Is it really based around the ETI? Does the ETI work?
Go right ahead, Raymond.
Thank you very much, Siamu, for that question. Before I respond to that quickly, Nicholas, I think Fasia is very, very much unfair to say the ACDP sent an older man. She needs to answer the question, why do we have a minister responsible for the youth issues in South Africa, that ministry being headed by an older lady? I think she must think about that one first before. Now, my apology for attending because our youth rep nationally was not available. And then finally, to Nyati, speaking about, what do you speak about? Okay, we have never governed. Quickly, I want to remind Nyati that as we speak, ACDP is co-governing. Is co-governing in the coalitions. And again, we have been governing in the Western Cape co-governing. We had one of our officials being the deputy mayor of Cape Town for a number of years, about 4 years. So we know about governance. We have been governing. We are in colleges, and we are co-governing there with even the TA. So you cannot come into the show and say we have never governed. Now let's come to Siamo's very important question. At Siamo, what I was doing as an introduction, I was introducing merely what we foresee as problems in South Africa relating to the youth employment. But now, speaking about solutions, you are correct. In our manifesto, we're outlining our policies. And one of the things, before I come to the tax issue, remember, we are saying that we need to create an enabling environment, because if you don't have your infrastructure developed, if you don't have good education, if you do not have vocational training, the environment cannot be conducive for even the private sector to invest in South Africa, through which we all know, Siamo, that parties do not create jobs. Jobs are created by an environment that is enabling to the companies to come and invest and therefore create employment. So that will be our function as a government. Now, the other solution to that, Siamo, is that you need to be reminded that we need to focus. We are saying we must focus on the competitive advantages like our mining and mineral resource sectors, okay? So that we can, through beneficiation, we can empower our youth, okay? Through productive agricultural sectors, we are mentioning there, our youth just needs to get involved in this sector. And I can tell you, Nyati, a lot of them are already involved in this sector. They merely need startups and help and financial help and also training, okay? Tourism is one of them. We know that most of our youth are flocking towards tourism, but that has to be expanded and it must be grown so that it attracts most of our youth. And the final one, maybe before I come to your tax issue, is that small businesses, SMEs, Nyati, we know very well that they will need to inculcate that culture of entrepreneurship to our youth through mentoring them. I said to you, they've already started. If you haven't seen the youth as activists starting their own programs in the townships, in the rural areas where you are, they are not sure where you're coming from, but they need what? To be mentored by those who are in the business for some time. They need to be given startups for funding. You know very well that some of them have started, they lack that. And there has to be skills development and training, even for those who are not yet ready in the labor market. So that's what ACDP is going to be doing. Now come to create business tax incentives. Nyati, we cannot do if you don't insist on companies, or rather maybe encouraging. The very same companies you are crying foul about, you have not seen them employing any youth. So we are saying the solution to them to do that is to encourage them, okay? Let's create that business tax incentive so that every business will know very well that there is this incentive that encourages them, especially when it comes to employing the youth in particular. So that will be our answer to you, Nyati.
Thank you very much for that, Raymond Tlale from the ACDP. Chimalatsi, your final question for the Patriotic Alliance is Chad Lowe.
Thank you so much. So to the Patriotic Alliance, I've seen some ambitious plans to support small businesses in South Africa. Can you explain how these initiatives that target small businesses would necessarily increase employment, and especially youth employment? I think for a lot of young people, there's a concern that your focus is more on addressing migration in the country than it is about creating opportunities for young people. Maybe could you address whether or not there are new opportunities that will be made by the PA? What are those new opportunities? What do they look like? How can a young person know that a PA government will have a jobs program for them outside of serving in the military, which I think was a discussion that was already litigated a bit earlier?
Chad, go right ahead.
Thank you, Nicholas. Nicholas, let me start by saying the reason why we are actually mentioning the fact of the military services is because I don't think that people are just running around with guns the whole day. You do have the medical department inside the military. You do have policing inside the military. You do have media and communications inside the military. So there's a vast opportunity when you do the military services thing, make it compulsory that people can actually go to. If you look at the 350 grant thing now, over 6 million are receiving these grants. Imagine if over 6 million people are actually working in the military in these different departments. We can even strengthen those departments, and 6 million people would have been employed by now. What I've mentioned earlier on is to simplify the process of getting funding and grants when you look at SMMEs and those small to medium scale businesses. The DA has also mentioned something earlier on about where they are governing good, which is perhaps not true, because if you look at the senior positions being taken up by the Western Cape government, only 6.1% are being taken up by the majority of the demographics in the Western Cape, which is the colored people. My question then is to say that where do colored people fit in? You said we shouldn't talk about racial lines. These are unfortunately the facts that 6.1% of colored people are actually holding positions there. We also need to have a look at why we are actually focusing on the migration thing. Is the fact of there's an unfortunate thing that happened actually in the Western Cape, in George, close to where I reside, where there was a building that collapsed. Now, what happened then is that the media confronted the DA-led municipality there and asked them who the construction company is. They didn't want to mention the name because what we have found out is that the majority of those people that were employed there are actually illegal foreigners. They have no database of those workers. The Labor Department doesn't have a sense of who these people are. There are no track of the workers that has been working there. Up to now, over 30 people are dead being found on that exact premises where the building has collapsed. Hence the reason why we are focusing so much on the immigration, because now people could have been employed that has the skill inside the George municipality. We would have maybe stayed away from this unfortunate thing. We could have saved this building from not collapsing, because we do have the people, we do have the skill, but our people are not getting employed. And that's the issue that we are addressing as a Patriotic Alliance.
Thank you very much for that, Chad. There's a couple of questions on the Q&A line that I want us to try and get to. There's a couple of minutes left. I'm going to give each party that is still with us a bite at the cherry. And maybe we can start off here with the ANC Youth League, Fasir Hassan. Okay, we've already answered the question around crisis. The ANC speaks as if they're still running for government. We in this state, because of the lack of governing now, they're coming as if they never had a chance to make a change. Well, that's more of a comment than a question. And Fasir, there was one particular question that you identified directed towards you.
Just quickly looking at those. Implementing of resources. Okay, let me try and cover these holistically so that I can.
Yeah, specifically, I'll read out the question quickly. After 30 years, why is the ANC still planning on making a change when they've had all the resources and have already disappointed under their leadership? Business couldn't make a change. How will it ever be different now? Your time starts now.
Look, the reality is we haven't actually had all the resources. We've come from 300 years of colonialism and decades more of apartheid. And that has systemically set us up for an economy that does not give access to the masses of our people, that does not give access to the Black masses of our people. And so coming in for the 30 years, of course, more needs to be done. But the reality is life is better now than it was in 1994. And every single metric speaks to that, from the census to Stats SA, which I'll speak to because the Western Cape still creates the least amount of jobs, even according to Stats SA. But not to worry, I'll share that on my social media even. And the reality here is that it is an election. And therefore, we must campaign and we must request, humbly so, the people of South Africa to continue supporting the ANC. So when I say why are we campaigning, why are we saying these things, it is because of that. It's because we need to continue to have plans to implement those changes. And you'll note I was very honest on this platform about some of the interventions that have worked and some of the interventions that haven't worked. But the reality is we're going up against, and actually what it is, a monster. And the truth, and I'll be honest here as well, even if there is another political party or coalition in power tomorrow, you're not going to solve this problem of youth unemployment like that with a snap of fingers, because it is designed for us to remain underprivileged and the underclass. So you do need a far more greater response. But I also want to speak to something else here, and this is very important, right? We've created over 2.5 million jobs for youth and in opportunities. We focused on skills. We're increasing locally made goods. I spoke about the textiles. There are 16.3 million people employed now, vis-a-vis in 1994. And there are more jobs that are created in Gauteng. EPWP, while we have our criticisms of it, it's proven to be a real economic transformation element in communities. And this was found in an independent study by UJ. In fact, Newsroom Africa covered it about last week. So the reality is things are better, but we do need to do more. And I'll just try and close on this, Niklaus.
On a point, please, Ms. Fasir.
Right. So the DA governs the city of Tshwane. They are in complete crisis. I actually am deployed there. I do a lot of constituency work there. And the reality is, again, it's a tale of two cities. If the lights go out in Centurion, I don't need to make a call. If something happens in Olivenhoutbush, they refuse to act. So you must see these parties for who they are. Thank you.
Fasir, thank you very much for that. Chad and Raymond, we'll get to you in a moment. But Nicholas, maybe you can just very quickly respond here. I mean, there's this consternation over whether or not the Western Cape government, led by the DA, has actually provided the amount of jobs that you're talking about. Are you confident of your figures? Are you confident of your statement?
Well, Nicholas, the problem here is that we are debating with people who are using gut feeling. I'm coming here and quoting and saying Stats SA that is giving us these figures. I'm coming here and saying it's National Treasury that is giving us these figures. You can go now on Google, best run municipality. It's a DA-led municipality. You go to Gauteng, where Fasir is from. Best run municipality in Gauteng is the Midval. She knows this. But I don't know. I hope she had changed. I prayed and prayed that Fasiha will finally speak the truth. It's not helping. Maybe Undate from ACDP can assist us. Now let's speak about this thing of Tshwane. Fasiha fails to mention that in Tshwane we took over for 2 years. After 2 years, they placed us under administration. We had to take them to the Constitutional Court. Tshwane was under administration for more than 2 years. She fails to mention this. This was by her colleague, the MEC. The Constitutional Court said they had placed Tshwane under administration illegally. So this was proven by the Constitutional Court. They did that because they wanted to cling into power. Secondly, when we took over with Cecilia Spring as mayor, they are Patriotic Alliance, the union there, went to the streets. These are ANC cadres, card-carrying members of the ANC, and are in an alliance with them. Went to the street and said, we are not going to offer any services. You know why? Because they wanted to be paid overtime. Overtime in Tshwane, people are getting paid 200% of their salaries in overtime. These are Fasia's friends. These are Fasia's
final point, Mr. Nyati.
My final point, she claims that she'll go to her social media and post these fake stats. I'm also going to go to my social media and fake pictures of Fasiha with the same people who are holding Tshwane hostage, with the same MEC who put Tshwane under administration. So people must also come to my social media where I expose Fasiha for who and what she is.
All right, Mr. Nyati, we'll have to leave it at that. It would make for some spicy engagement if we had this two-way conversation between Fasir and Nicholas, but I don't want to forget that we have Tiamo Malachi that we also want to hear from. But Raymond Tlale from the ACDP, you said you formed part of many coalition governments around the country since 1994. Very briefly, maybe could you tell us, what is the ACDP's game plan going into this election? What are your guiding lights when it comes to making and forming a coalition government, especially when it comes to tackling youth unemployment? Raymond.
Nicholas, I'm not sure whether it's on my side. I can't see my button or rather, can you hear me?
Yes, please go right ahead. Go right ahead. Don't worry about your camera for the moment.
Okay,
Go right ahead.
I didn't see that. Okay, thank you very much. Firstly, Nicholas, let me finally conclude our contribution before I come to coalitions by saying that to remind the members that it is very important for us as ACDP to create a matching processes because we are concerned about the young people here, to connect the young job seekers as well as together with the employers in the labor market. That's very important. The agents that are currently operating do not necessarily have the requisite skills to do so. That's why you find most of the young men and women that are job seekers are left out from the job market. And the final 2 points I want to make is that there's no way you can improve the youth employment if you don't tackle the issue of making it easy for them to start their new businesses by removing whatever form of unnecessary red tape that is currently in place. That's not going to happen. And finally, you must deal deliberately with the policy uncertainties in the country, which affect, we know that they affect direct foreign investment. I've spoken about that, but I wanted to emphasize that. Now, finally, coming to the coalitions, you know that currently we are not in coalition nationally with any political party, but we are in the charter with the rest of the parties that many of you know about. And the plan for us to be in the charter is to begin to discuss the probable type of government that we wish we should have, should we form a coalition. Now, those are merely discussions, and agreements are set, and we have agreed to that. When we come to the coalitions, if it happens, definitely this agreement that we've signed is going to be revisited and look into how do we form that type of a government. Firstly, you ask a question to benefit the youth of South Africa. The first thing that there are many legislation we're going to look into, but the first one is to make sure that we have legislations that I mentioned. They need to cut through and deal with these red tapes that makes it impossible for the youth to start their own businesses. We need to empower the youth financially. There must be an endeavor to make sure that any youth that's going to start
Final point, please, Mr. Tlale.
Okay, thank you very much. So that is the main thing. As we come into coalition, our focus to the youth will be to make sure that they are assisted. Because remember, I started with one point, which many did not even mention. People come here to think that the youth are sitting and they're waiting to be given packs and all that. They are waiting there to be assisted and to be encouraged and to be skilled to be participants in the economy of South Africa. And that is what the AC is going to focus on, even when we go into coalition, to promote that. Make sure that we help them in any way that they can't help themselves. But above everything else, let them be assisted in accordance with their own endeavors, with their own initiatives, so that they can become the role players in creating jobs for themselves and for others in South Africa. Thank you.
Mr. Tlale, thank you very much. Mr. Lowe, we're running out of time here, but I definitely want to hear from you. What is the Patriotic Alliance's guiding light going to be when it comes to coalition governments? You've been kingmaker in many governments across South Africa. Some may argue you haven't been the most progressive and constructive kingmakers, but how is your approach to coalition politics going to benefit the youth of South Africa after this election?
Thank you, Nicholas. Nicholas, I think talking about coalitions, first, I would like to say that we're definitely looking at governing the Western Cape. So we will definitely be unseating the DA in the Western Cape to bring more opportunities and more jobs to the people of the Western Cape, making a government that works for everyone. And then also to be the kingmaker when it comes to national government, because we all know the ANC will not govern this country after the 29th of May. So we are looking at putting in the mechanisms and the possibilities that I've mentioned throughout this interview, making sure that it works for our people, making sure that there's opportunity for everyone. We are not working like in the Western Cape where it's only for certain people and for a certain race, and that's the facts. The same with when it comes to the national government where it's only for certain people and certain people that actually gets opportunities. We want to govern the Western Cape. We want to govern the Northern Cape. And we are definitely looking at being the kingmaker when it comes to national government, ensuring that everyone gets an opportunity as South Africans and not just a particular race. Thank you.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Lowe. We're unfortunately out of time, but a final word from Chi Malatia, youth activist. Chi, your hand's been up for a while. Thank you for being patient. You have the final word.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's discussion. To the political parties, thanks for bringing your youth representatives. That was a positive. Maybe one negative is that for a lot of young people like myself who might have been engaged in this and other conversations, we might fear that from the political party side, the focus is more on politicking, and I know it's in the election season, than it is on the youth issues, discussing the youth issues, finding ways forward. So hopefully from our political leadership, we can just renew our focus on solving young people's issues, which can also explain why a lot of young people disengage from the political process, because a lot of us are not too interested in a lot of the political contestations that happen between political parties. We're just worried about solving the issues that we're going to inherit. But despite that, I'm very grateful for everyone who joined this call, for the political parties for answering our questions and for giving us their roadmap about how they might address youth issues. And hopefully come after 29th of May, some of these programs that have been stated will be implemented, and we'll be here in Bloemfontein and young people around the country waiting for these programs, actively participating in them. And hopefully the next time Status A releases reports on youth unemployment, the rate would have gone down. Thank you.
We can only live in hope. That was the yes or no. Is youth unemployment a priority this election period? It was the vodcast hosted by Youth Capital. A recording of this conversation is going to be on their YouTube channel during the course of the day. I'm Nicholas Bauer. Thank you very much for joining us for the past hour and a bit. Thank you for putting up with the technical challenges that we were facing, but at least we got to the crux of the conversation. How do we fix youth unemployment in South Africa? 4 main political parties on the scene here, vying for your vote on May the 29th. Thank you very much to Fasia Hassan from the ANC Youth League, Nicholas Nyati from the DA, Raymond Tlale from the ACDP, and of course also Chad Lowe from the Patriotic Alliance. This would not have been possible without the team from Youth Capital, Chloe, Fence, and Chris. Thank you very much for your support in the run-up to this discussion. We'll be having one final installment of this series after the May 29th poll. Go out, make your voice heard. South Africa needs you this election period, May 29th, 2024. Goodbye and speak to you soon.
Thank you, Nicholas. Bye-bye, everyone.